Hey, this is Warren Bird, Research Director, Leadership Network. I have the privilege of talking with Patrick OConnell. He is the director of New Thing, which is not only a church planting movement associated with Community Christian Church, and they've got this great tagline, a catalyst for a movement of reproducing churches, but he also oversees the Residency, which is a more intentional internship program associated both with the New Thing church planting and Community Christian. Wow. Uh, Welcome, Patrick. Give us a quick overview of what it is you do in the area of internships and residencies.
Yeah, Warren, great to be with you. I think residency is really important. It's an important component of what New Thing is and what we've been about. Essentially, a residency is a time where a church planter is preparing to go off and launch a new work for the kingdom. And so all of the pieces and all the benefits of working with a church planting organization are inherent in a residency program. And I have the privilege and the luxury of working with people who want to go out and start new things and plant new churches, that plant new churches, that plant new churches. We really try to focus on the multiplication piece of all of that. And so our deep desire is that not only do we plant some great churches, but those churches can also plant new great churches as well.
Super. How many are involved at any given time? How long has this been running? And where does the money come from?
Yeah, good questions. Right now, we've got about 50 residents in training at New Thing. We've been doing it really since we got started. New Thing's about 10 years old. And residency was one of those components that we adopted early on and have been refining ever since. Residency has always been a self-funded enterprise. Now you got to understand that residency is not so much of what I declare it to be. We're kind of catalyzing residencies within our network of churches. So some churches have paid their residents, but from the official point of view, there's no great pot of money that I have that I distribute to our residents. It would be nice if I did. But we've always tried to, the first kind of hurdle that we want to see residents overcome is that fundraising piece. So at least for us, on kind of an official capacity, residencies have always been self-funded.
And where do you find these residents, or how do they find you?
Great question. I look at it as really there's two big buckets. I call one the free agents. Those are our free agents are going to the conferences. They're reading blogs. They're reading your books, Warren. They know that God's at work in their lives, and they're looking for a tribe or a connection. They might have recently graduated from seminary or Bible college. There's some free agents out there. And we try to connect with them at conferences like Exponential and elsewhere. And that's one group of people. And then the other piece that I think, the other pot that is the bigger pot that I'm actually personally passionate about is the farm system. And those are the residents, the potential residents in our churches right now. And they don't have the language and the license around residencies. So we're actively endeavoring to identify those potential residents for the future. They might be business leaders, they might be college kids, they might be any number of occupations at the moment. But I'm deeply convinced that the next generation of leaders in the church, at least the vast bulk of them, can actually be found within our church congregations at the moment. So I'm committed to kind of mining both of those pools, fishing in both of those ponds, if you will.
Does your residency program have a fixed time? You know, it's a set so many months, and whatever the time framework, does it have a rhythm that, okay, the first month we go take them through an orientation, which involves such and such? How prescribed is it?
Yeah, great question. We've always talked about a residency being a 9 to 12 month-ish process. Some residencies are longer, some are shorter. And there's three segments, and this is the bigger segments. There's the unlearning phase. A resident comes into a residency and frankly needs to unlearn some things. Because you've led in ministry doesn't make that appropriate to lead in a church planting context. So there's that phase where you're unlearning, you're teachable. That's the first part. The next part is the learning phase, where you're actually learning some nuts and bolts about church planting. You're leading teams, you're reproducing, you're learning how to teach and communicate, vision cast, all the things that a great church planner needs to know. And then the third phase would be the sending phase, where you're actively engaged in reproducing yourself out of your role, finishing well, and you're leading your team, hopefully a new team of people, you're fundraising, and you're moving into the actual church planting endeavor itself. So those are the three big buckets that are the three big segments that I kind of think about when we're talking about residency. 9 to 12 months-ish. Again, we've never really said, I'd like to see at least 9 months. There's been a few residents who have done 6 or 7 and done quite well. Had some residents do a 2-year residency as well, and that's worked out for them. It just really is dependent on the speed of the leader and the development process and what that leader needs to learn during the residency, so to speak.
I know whenever you ask a minister, what does a typical week look like, they always go like, well, there is no such thing as typical. But can you talk about the buckets? You know, how much soul care is there? How much assisting with the weekend ministries of Community Christian Church or one of its plants? How much classroom? How much team? Can you give us some of the big buckets?
Yeah. We're in January, we're launching the Leadership Training Center, the New Thing Leadership Training Center at Community. And our dream is that we're going to reproduce that training center at our network. What that looks like is the resident spends the bulk of his time in the field with a local campus pastor or local leader doing ministry. They're participating in team meetings, strategic planning, they're leading small groups, they're overseeing certain teams of other people, they're actually doing ministry. Then they're coming to a classroom environment for approximately 3 hours a week. And we've actually, as part of our Leadership Training Center, we've scoped out 40 weeks of 3 hour a night. So I've got that. That's the new kind of endeavor. That's the curriculum piece, the classroom piece. We've actually entered into a partnership with Wheaton College. Our residents who go through the program and complete all those 40 weeks will actually get credit towards a master's at Wheaton. So we've always done the field work element, which is the bulk of the residents' time. We actually say, you know, doing life in a local campus context that's actually engaged in reproducing. And now we're introducing this more formal classroom component, and we want to live in the tension of both. And so that's, I hope, where God's going to do his thing. Classroom's important, field time is important, and I think two of them together make a fantastic residency.
Talk about supervision. You're the director. To what extent do these intern residents report to you? To what extent do they have a mentor or multiple mentors? And especially if they have areas of specialization that they want to learn about.
Yeah, we've always said about a residency that it's what you make of it. So we asked the resident to create an action learning plan. That resident is assigned to a local campus or church, and the local leader, the campus pastor, or the church, the lead pastor, actually will be mentoring that resident. We've always tried to match our residents with our leads. And so that might mean that they're meeting one-on-one, one time per week at least, possibly more. That lead pastor is kind of overseeing the resident's experience in the field. We often talk about the capacity of those lead pastors. They really have got to be visionary leaders. They've got to want to invest in the next generation of leaders by doing this. So they're spending time together in the field. And then I'm overseeing, I'm essentially serving our leaders who are mentoring our residents. And so the bulk of my role is kind of operationally making all that happen, and then overseeing when we do bring our residents together in the classroom environment, the teaching and the actual education piece that we offer our residents. But it's really the lead at the edge, as we say, who is overseeing the residents' experience. And so it's really important to us that we're building that capacity for resident in our lead pastors, in our campus pastors, because we could have a wonderful curriculum experience, have it all scoped out, can take them through some great books, but if the resident has a poor experience in the field, our work is for naught. And so we're trying to balance those out all the time.
All right. Now, I've primed you on some tough questions I'm going to ask about mistakes. You've done internships and residencies longer than most churches.
Mm.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you've made, and what have you done to compensate or to replace what you found didn't work?
Yeah, what I think the biggest mistake is that we have allowed the residents on certain occasions to plant too fast. With our residency structure, we really want our resident to know the destination where he's going to plant and that time. And so, in a number of occasions, we've got to that sending phase a little too fast, I think. We haven't given them enough space to actually do, to learn what they need to learn about church planting. The other mistake I think that we've made consistently is not to bring our residents together in a classroom environment. We've trusted that the resident was learning at the fringe, and that's fine. We want that, and that will be our bias. But I think we've learned that there's a lot more opportunity we have in bringing our residents together, almost cohorting our residents together. Of course, that community, as an example, we're 13 locations. So ideally, we'd have a resident at every campus. Bringing those residents together to share in a peer-to-peer kind of environment. We've had fits and starts of that, but we are going to be changing that as we develop this new leadership training center. And then I think the money piece has been, there's positives to, and there's advantages to not having a pile of cash and kind of putting the onus for fundraising on the resident. Of course, there's some disadvantages to that as well.
What about the spouse of the residents? Have there been any painful learnings that, the resident's doing great, let's say it's a guy and his wife is not feeling trained, supported, that she's not on the journey as well? What have you learned through that?
Yeah, that's an ongoing challenge. And what we've always asked our residents to do is go through a formal assessment. So the assessment, the church planner assessment, that needs to always be with the spouse. And we do look at the resident and the resident's marriage as a church planting couple. However, one of the things that we've got to improve on is the ability to kind of gather our spouses together, the resident spouses, and have them go through this experience together. We've tended to leave that at the field level. Now that resident and spouse is working with the lead pastor and his spouse. So there's those relationships happening at the campus level. But I think we've kind of missed an opportunity to bring those spouses together in the same way that we bring the residents together now. We do work with other church planting organizations during the church planting process, and some of those organizations do have spousal care ministries. New Thing doesn't have a formal spousal care ministry, however, in that regard.
What about the balance between soul care, me developing as a person, as a disciple of Jesus Christ myself, and developing ministry skills and involved with others? Has there been any painful learning about how to do the balance there for you?
Yeah, I think with our residency, it's keep in mind that we don't look at the residency as a place to decide that you want to plant a church. The residency is preparatory work for the actual action of planting a church. Our first module in this new leadership training center is spiritual formation. We start with Christology. Who is Jesus? What do we understand about Jesus? Then we move into missiology. What do we understand about the mission of God in the world? And then finally, we talk about the ecclesiological issues. We do try to make soul care an important and an ongoing component of our residency. We ask our residents to keep a journal during their experience. We ask them during the one-on-one with their lead pastor at the campus location that they're going through some particular coaching questions that are targeted towards the soul of the resident. Part of our ongoing kind of coaching environment here at Community and through New Thing. So I think the combination of the in the field, and now we'll have this classroom component. We're beginning with the soul care component. We want to make sure that that is where we start this thing, because obviously ministry flows from the heart. We're aware of that. And the challenge of a residency can become very task focused. Many of these residents are, I need to know this, I got to figure this out, tell me how to do this, what's a model for that? And they can quickly set aside the soul care for a season while they gear up for the actual church planting endeavor. We try to rein that back as much as we possibly can.
Well said. Now, you've also worked with a lot of other churches who have come to you and said, our internship, our residency isn't working so well. It blew up here, blew up there. Let's talk about some of the mistakes you see others do and that those hearing us can learn from as well.
Yeah, I think the distinction between a residency and an internship is worthwhile actually sitting down with your team and hashing it out. For us, a residency has been the step before the launch of a new church. It's not the place to determine if I've been called to plant a church. So one of the things we're often asked by churches is, hey, I've got an internship program. What do I need to do to plant more churches through that? I would say that that's kind of not correct. Those are two distinct endeavors. Those are two, the outcomes of either an internship is different from a residency, in my mind, at least. And so I see a lot of churches using those terms interchangeably, not quite understanding that the one, for us at least, leads to church planting, where the other one is more exploring ministry perhaps, or learning about the internal mechanisms and dynamics of a church, all appropriate to an internship. But the residency, it's kind of like, it's the shoot before launch, and we want to make sure the right people are getting into that. So I see churches struggling to just define that a little bit.
What else do you see churches do that causes you to wince or causes them to say it's not working so well?
Yeah, I think a lot of residency programs, my bias, and this is just me speaking more, my bias is towards planting more new churches. I've watched a few churches develop some really great leaders and then hang on to them, plug them into an existing ministry opportunity, plug them into a new campus, all good things. We celebrate that. But the pure essence of a residency is we're going to go out and start something brand new. And so I've seen some churches call it a residency or call it a church planter and training environment, but maybe not live entirely into what it's truly about, for at least for us at New Thing, and that is a new work for the kingdom.
Anything else you've seen in other churches where their program has gone south?
The affiliation with the overemphasis on a curriculum is probably one that I see often churches making, where we've got to train them with as much knowledge as possible. And while that is true, during a church planting season, the resident needs to know how to fundraise, how to organize a team, all those good things. Those are more the practice of church planting. I've watched a few residency programs just spend a lot of time in theology. I love theology. But again, the residency for us is a season of preparation for launching the church. While we do talk about theology in our residency, we've got kind of the big hills already identified, theologically speaking. And so we want our residents to be knowledgeable, but I think there can be an overemphasis on the knowledge component versus the actual practice component of church planting.
One of my favorite books is Dave and John Ferguson's book, Exponential. I have recommended it to so many people. I was using it last night, unrelated to prepping for this interview, and quoting with somebody else, and it's just beyond where the camera is. One of the heartbeats of that book you can't help but pick up is this reproduction idea of reproducing themselves, which makes the internship and residency piece of a community Christian just an inherent part of it. So maybe this is a softball question, but let's make sure, how has the residency program contributed to the mission of community Christian, and in particular, has it helped it grow or become healthier?
Yeah, I would say two things. Yes, it helps us because we talk about we cannot reproduce at the macro level. We can't plant new churches unless we've learned how to reproduce at the micro. And so one of the experiences that we ask every resident to do is reproduce teams, reproduce people. Because if you can't reproduce a small group, you're probably going to struggle to plant new churches. And so we live in the tension of doing both of those really well. The other thing that we've benefited from, the residency actually gives language and license to people like me. So I was far from God. I found my way back to God at community. I'm one of the stories that they tell of somebody finding their way back to God in Exponential in the book. I had known that our church planted churches. I didn't know what church planting was. And then I watched people like myself, business people who had once been far from God, maybe those who didn't have a seminary education, go out and plant new churches. And so the residency has actually been that little engine, that catalyst that continues to draw people in from the farm system into the more macro endeavors of kingdom and church planting. And I think having that as a pathway for leaders within is absolutely essential. And so even as an example, as we're building out this leadership training center, I'm interviewing the farm system people as much as I'm interviewing the free agents. And the good news is that there's more people in the farm system, people who are maybe leading at a high level in a small group ministry or in a kids ministry, who are saying, hey, maybe God's calling me to plant a new work. And so I love that the residency is the space, and at least is the engine that draws that and continues that momentum for us. I think without the residency, without our macro vision of planting more campuses and churches, that we would even lose sight of why we even reproduce small groups or reproduce leaders or reproduce Kids City leaders. And so that's the tension that we live in at Community. It's the tension that Dave and John talk about in Exponential, and we try to live that out at New Thing as well.
Let me push that a little farther. Suppose there's a pastor who says, I've just hired staff or, done volunteers. This whole internship residency, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Is this farm system idea, your leadership development pipeline, is that the pathway that would lead someone best into forming a formal residency or internship program?
Yes. So if that example lead pastor, I would ask that lead pastor, who are you investing in right now? Who are you apprenticing right now? Because if you're not going to model that behavior, chances are it's not really going to become part of your culture. So give props to Dave Ferguson. Dave Ferguson still leads a small group. For all of his many endeavors and the platforms that God's given him, for Dave, it's about apprenticing my next leader, whether it's a mechanic, whether it's a school teacher or an engineer. And so what I've often said about our culture is that we've got to be casting a wider net to invest in the next generation of leaders, and we've got to give language and license to everyone to do that. And some lead pastors see their role, see that as an exclusive role for only them. So for us, I'm talking to a number of leaders right now about becoming residents who started off as small group apprentices, who got their first chops at leading in God's kingdom as a small group leader. And so you can't start the macro and plant the church, in my mind at least, unless you've made that shift, that paradigm shift to where I am investing in the people that God's given me. And I've developed a deliberate and intentional leadership pathway that may mean my best leaders go. That I train and develop this leader for a number of years. They enter into a residency, and then we send them to a new city to plant the new work. I call that a kingdom mindset, a kingdom-focused church, a movemental church, whatever you want to refer to that as. And that's the distinctive about the residency for us. It's not just simply training leaders for our own teams and our own ministries. It could be that, but it's that switch to that paradigm shift to that kingdom endeavor. And that starts at the micro level for us.
Patrick, let's land by putting a face on that. Tell me a story. Give me an example of someone or some circumstance that embodies what you've just described.
Yeah, if you can indulge me, Warren, I think even my own story, because I didn't start out as a Christian. never dreamed I'd be a church planter. And the fact that I'm leading a church planting organization is really proof that God's got a sense of humor, because never in my wildest dreams would that have been what I thought my life would lead to. I found my way back to God. I began apprenticing. I began leading. I began coaching. That led to moving to Kansas City. It's Troy's story in Exponential. I went to Kansas City as a leadership resident. We launched our first location in Kansas City, pregnant with our next 2 locations. So our dream was to plant a network of reproducing churches. And I found that that's how I found my way into church planting. I began coaching and training other church planters. I guess because of my business background, I was able to begin training other residents, and just had a blast doing that, and really developing people for new works in the kingdom. Found my life and calling. I say this: I found Jesus at Community, and I also found my mission. And those have been huge for me. And so that is an example. Now I got to apprentice a leadership resident when I was in Kansas City, a guy by the name of Matt Miller. Matt had extensive ministry experience, came from a very, very large church, but entered into a residency with us at Restore in Kansas City. And he went through that unlearning phase, and then he went through that learning phase, and then he went through that sending phase. And Matt has launched New City Church in Shawnee, Kansas. They're a couple years old. They've got 2 locations. They've got 2 residents in training, and on the mission of Jesus goes. And so that, I think, illustrates how we go from a dude like me finding his way back to God, kind of fumbling his way through all that leadership development pipeline that you read about in Exponential, and then actually having some influence by God's grace on a next generation of leadership. And now at New Thing, wow, I get to participate and invest in all these leaders who are doing new things for the kingdom. It's just a wonderful example of how God can work if we release that to the fringe, as we say at New Thing.
Well, Patrick O'Connell, director of New Thing, may God continue to use you to reproduce many Patrick O'Connells and Mikes and so many others that you've described. A joy to talk with you today.
Thanks, Warren. Same to you. Appreciate you, my friend.